Hey, on this episode of the Ethics Experts, we talked to Janine. She is a kind of a compliance unicorn. She has a really cool mix of right brain, left brain, analytical, creative. And she's talked about how being an enigma and embracing how you are wired can really help you be a more impactful person on your team or within your organization. She has a really cool story, and I think you'll see how she really has leaned into storytelling to drive more change in her organization and to find those little wins. Compliance is a very difficult role. There's many times we feel like we have the weight of the world on our shoulders, and if we can't find those little wins along the way, it makes our job so much harder. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hi, how are you?
How's it going? Good to see you.
Good. You too.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts.
Thank you.
I love that fake background.
It's real.
I know, I'm kidding. How's your day going so far?
Good, thank you. How's yours?
It's going great. Been excited to get you on since our pre-show. I can usually tell on the pre-show how good of an episode it's going to be. So no pressure. I'm just telling you, I got a lot of confidence in this one.
What's your meter giving you for feels?
10.
You know, that's great because part of what I want to talk about today is intuition. So there you have it.
You know, I love intuition. I'm really leaning into my intuition, and I feel like 2026 is going to be the year of intuition.
I love that. It's
so I always like to get started with this question, Janine. What were you like growing up? What kind of a kid were you? I can always find some threads that kind of tie back to that, but what was your childhood like? And how did you get into this space?
Sure. So a childhood journey. I was a very introverted kid growing up, and I have always had the sense of being just insightful and empathetic and creative and just driven by these strong values, like from the moment I can remember. And just a sense of justice, lack of integrity in humans just baffled me. I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. And I think that was a challenge of, people around me or adults would have this sense of, well, she's an old soul, and just not really fully being able to understand that mixed match between age and having this sense of this greater good and just these very big concepts at such an early age. And so being introverted, I very much valued true friendships and people, but I didn't like those large, loud groups of kids, of people. Still remember going to my room and closing the door shut the one birthday party I had as a kid and not coming out till it was over, right? And regardless of all that, I didn't want to be on the spotlight. I didn't want the attention. But I still always really appreciated praise. And the praise part about that was not so much, being there or being the center of attention or about me, but knowing that something that happened ended up good. Right. And so moving on through all of that, I, got involved in social interactions or things that engaged me in that sense of fulfillment. So, scouts or youth groups or community service. And in all those situations, I started to find myself in these positions where I was often voluntold of being a captain on a team or a presenter in a group that needed somebody to speak for them. And I'm going, what, me? Like, I'm not the loudest kid there yelling, and jumping, or I'm not the one being, the bossy, hey, you go do this, you go do that. Why me? Why me? And I could never get my head wrapped around that. And as that evolved and I got older, sometimes it's also just rising to the occasion, right? Nobody else wanted to do it. So I would say, you know what, I'll do it. And just that sense of stepping up and saying, well, I'll get us there together. I get it. I understand the concept. Let's do this. And so I think that's how it started out for me at a very early age.
So you kept getting pushed into these like leadership roles, and you kind of probably started to gain some confidence in that over time.
Yeah.
How did this sort of introverted kid who just wanted to kind of play alone in the sandbox and not be part of the, rowdy throng or mosh pit of other kids. Like, how did that dynamic in, what you just referenced shape the way you lead your compliance team today?
I don't think it was later in life till it really started to resonate. And it goes back to this concept for me of kind of misnomenclature, misnaming of leadership as a whole. So I think society has kind of mixed match titles in a way of approaching leadership. So you think about management and managers, or my boss, or management team, or corporate. We have all these different kind of ways of saying that, and then we mush that all together and we think about that as the leadership team, right? And I shied away from that. I practiced in management. I got myself through college, managing people, being a manager, an assistant manager, and I don't love candidly managing people. So I shied away from it, even though I knew kind of at your deep center or core of who I was that there was something special about leadership. And so it wasn't until later on down the road when I discovered the concepts of kind of what true leadership meant. And there was different leadership styles, and was doing some reading and research on that. And the concept of servant leadership really struck me to my core. And I said, wait a minute, that's me. I kind of get it now. There's different ways to lead. There's different ways to manage. Those are very different things. And I want to be that. I want to be a leader. I don't want to manage people. Managing people is, let's face it, it's hard work that just flat out is terrible sometimes. But the concept of true leadership is something I said, let me think about that, because I love seeing other people succeed. I like to be an advocate. I understand and I want to get to the greater good behind things. That's fulfilling. I actually do like leadership. It's not about me. It's not about me being in the spotlight. It's not about me being that voice in the room or what Janine did. And so that's where I think it really started to sink in and say, well, let me apply this to how I approach both my work, my team, how I approach life, and professionally, personally.
So when you're learning about servant leadership, what is it that resonated with you? And, that term just gets thrown around so much, it almost turns into like a bit of a platitude. So like in your mind, what is servant leadership and what is it not?
I completely agree with that, which is why I always kind of hesitate in same way with management. I kind of cringe a little bit. What is that really, right? Make it about the team, and you see all those hoorah kind of platitudes, or even those images of like hold everybody up. And where I think I grasped onto it the most is a thought of going back to integrity. And we hear that a lot in compliance and ethics. Don't just, talk the talk, walk the walk. But at its core, I think it's being able to see the big picture and then breaking that down into smaller pieces and identifying in people what they're able to do, what they're capable of, and leading them in such a way that it pivots away from the job that you are doing, and you are bringing out the most of who they are, what they're capable of, their autonomy, and saying, this is how we all work together for the greater good. And it becomes less about, that whole concept of you're bringing people along. It's you're truly understanding them as a person, as a human, and you are thinking about ways and methods to help it be meaningful for them. So it's natural that everybody's moving in the same course in the same direction.
Yeah, it's like an outward focus, kind of underscored by like a heart for enablement and a heart for seeing somebody for who they are and what they could be.
Yeah, very well said.
Oh, thank you. See, 10 out of 10. I told you this is going to be a 10.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So you start learning about leadership. Talk to me a little bit about kind of your path into this space. So you went to college. Yeah. What were some of those kind of lily pads that kind of funneled you into where you're at now?
The prequel to all this, I mean, that's a podcast within itself, quite frankly. So, I wasn't sure I wanted to go to college, even though academically I've always, 4.0. When I did decide to go to college, got an academic scholarship, all those things. But I didn't know what I really wanted to pursue in life. There's always been a sense of duality between academics and intelligence and all of those things for me. And then just that sense of emotional and philosophical and all the feels, right? And it's like, how do you bring all that together? What do you do? And so what I did know, and which is why I kind of chose the course I did in undergrad, is I knew whatever I decided I wanted to do, I wanted to help people. And I knew that in order to do that, in order to get very far in life, you need to know how to communicate the world around you and with people. And I didn't want to go into psychology or philosophy, even though those things are very interesting to me. And I didn't want to go on full on business because I felt like that didn't have enough heart. And I realized where I was going, they had an emphasis and a major in communication. Not with an S, like communications, where you think about radio and TV, but communication, which is the study of how people interact with one another. So it courses in philosophy, in psychology, in business, all of those kind of little different pieces and parts. And I said, that I can sign up for, because that within itself, no matter where I kind of take that, those principles, I can put those anywhere. Totally. So that's what I did. And then, coming out of that, I, right out of college, got my first ever, professional, if you will, job, back in the internet advertising boom of things. So, the analytical side of me kicked up because I did a lot of data entry and, working off of lead generation, and, was laid off from that. And then, had a quick pivot and turn into healthcare, which is how I got my start in healthcare, and was working more on the HR side in healthcare for a while, and didn't love that, but kept at it. And there were things I liked about that and didn't, and had then had an opportunity to work in PR. And I was going through some life changes at the time. And I said, well, that's interesting. I like writing. I like, telling stories. And so I had a very short stint in public relations and events. And that was intriguing, and had a huge life change right in the middle of kind of the housing bubble crisis fall, and some personal changes. And I decided in the midst of all of that, with my very A-type personality, to pack everything up, put it in storage, move to New York City, and just start all over again, and decide what I truly wanted, and to kind of give my A-type personality the middle finger and say, what happens when you don't know what's going to happen? Yeah. How do you evolve into the person that you want to be? And what does that look like? What do I want to do? And I did that. And that was very, very hard for me, because I've always...
What was that like? That was like, you just kind of like invited a bunch of turmoil into your life.
I did, and I embraced it. And with parts of me internally screaming, of course. And, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And it helped me get over that fact of what do you do when you don't know what's going to happen and you're there, right? Compared to all those plans and a plan for if this happens. And I realized it wasn't so bad. You find out who you are, you find out your true character, you find out that people give you a lot more grace and offer you a lot more just support as needed. And then I also, by moving to New York City, if you can make it, you can make it anywhere, right? That's saying, I found out that, working hard, being scrappy, being innovative, and learning how to read people all mattered very much. And that's how, in a very roundabout way, I got into compliance. I was got the opportunity to get back into healthcare, and was working on some things on the administrative side, and doing some analytical data work for some stuff with the CEO. And there was an opportunity when the compliance coordinator at the time moved on, for me to step into that role. And I, from the CEO got the, hey, Janine, I think you might be good at this. Are you interested? I said, Okay, I'll give it a shot.
What do you think he saw in you that made him think you'd be good in it?
It's a good question. I definitely probably the love for analyzing things and understanding both the kind of big picture and also all the small intricacies. And I really, when I get into something, I really get into the weeds, but then I pull back out and I apply it elsewhere. And so I think he probably saw the potential there, even though at the time I didn't have the full fruition to be like, wow, this is a great fit for me.
Yeah. That's kind of a unique ability to be able to go deep and zoom out. Not everybody has that, right? Like some people are really just kind of bottom up people or just kind of detail only people, and other people are just like super high level. My brother is that way, like you. He can go, me and him are partners in our business, and he can really zoom into the details, and he can balance that against that big picture thinking. And it really is a superpower. You in our pre-call, you were kind of, you said a couple of times that, you don't have a JD, and you come from this operations background. And that can kind of be a point of pride. And I think, more and more people in this, lawyer dominated space are opening their minds to, letting more unicorns into the field, so to speak. How has not being a lawyer been a competitive advantage for you as you're trying to operate, as you're trying to drive your program into your business, or as you're trying to operationalize ethics in your organizations?
Sure. So I think most predominantly it's my personality, and I don't want to, I'm sure people with JDs have that too. I think it's probably very uncommon. And what I mean by that is people with JDs have been trained, right? That's why they have the ability to do what they do, interpreting the law, to think certain ways and to analyze certain ways. And to interpret those laws in certain ways. And as I've grown myself and evolved in the compliance field, I definitely understand and I see the importance in that. And I think you can train your brain to get it wrapped around those things. But when we were talking, I was just kind of walking you through. I've recently come to this place, and I think a lot of it has to do with probably just a lot of the changing regulations and everything moving so fast, and this candidly level of uncertainty with where we are in society right now, that lately I've the laws and regulations, yes, they're important, and that, need to have the JD behind the chief compliance officer side of things. I get it. We all need to follow the law, and that is the cornerstone of probably what we do. But on the flip side of that, I have embraced, and I see the difference in a change. I think there's a reason they call it compliance and ethics, because if we're not able to incorporate all of the gray areas, all of just the parts of the how we do what we do and the why we are doing it the way we are doing it, how we are telling a story, then we're not able to, at the end of the day, fully come to that letter and spirit of the law. And I think that's what probably makes my view a little bit different than a legal aspect of it, because coming from that operational background and coming from whom I am as a person, there's a lot of ways to get there, to comply, to follow the law, to follow the regulation. But when you put people first, or in healthcare, right, you put the patient first and you say, why is this here? How are we doing it? And why are we doing it that way? That's where I think I find my niche in compliance, because those things are what truly matters. I think that's why the laws are there in the first place.
I mean, compliance is a verb. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it? No, it's not a verb, but it's an action is my point. Okay. Compliance is maybe an adverb or something. I'm not like an English guy, but I'm saying
go with verb. I like it as a verb.
It's an action, I guess to comply is a verb. But compliance itself requires actions, right? Like we can write all these policies and we can, build all these procedures, but the extent to which compliance is occurring is a function of the actions that people take. or the actions that taken by the organization, and those actions are all driven by people, and those people are all doing voluntary actions. You know what I'm saying? Like no one's like wired to do something. It's all a choice. It's a choice. It was a choice for you to show up on this. I'm so embarrassed that I call that a verb, but you get my point. It was your choice to show up on this call. It was my choice to show up to work. Like nobody has to come to work or has to do anything. Those are all kind of voluntary contributions to the system that we're all kind of a part of. And I think when organizations, oversample, just to use kind of shorthand, that that words on the page aspect of compliance, they pay short shrift to your point, where the rubber meets the road, where the actual magic is, where we can influence the humans inside of our organization to, when they're at that crossroads, to err on the side of doing the right thing, or to even recognize, in many cases, they don't even recognize that they're at a crossroads. We need to make them, open their eyes to it, turn them into these human sensors, but that can only really be done not by like coding into their brain, right? It can be only be done, like you said, through storytelling and through that sort of like influential interaction.
That's right. And I'll make you feel a little bit better about that, because now you have my brain going into, wow, that would make a really good article of compliance as a verb being the title. Like, because I think, forget about the English aspects, right? Or proper English aspects for a minute. It's very true. It needs to be in who we are, in our actions, and going back to that concept of, again, like integrity, and really thinking about what is resonating with people, why are they doing what they're doing, and how are they doing it? Because if we don't grasp a hold of that, we can't expect the organization to have a culture of compliance, of ethics.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's a great idea. A great idea for a title, maybe even of a book. But the compliant behavior is a dependent variable that's based on that independent variable of that action. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Of that knowledge, and trigger it, it's triggered in the mind, and that right decision is made. We should work on that article together, huh? So you've, you're kind of this unicorn, this analytical, kind of detailed person, but can also kind of get big picture. You can do analysis, but you also understand storytelling and how to interact with people and read people, and all that stuff from your communication background that really resonated with you. You in our pre-call, you described yourself as I think a creative analytical. And so, kind of being able to dance between that left and right brain. Where does that right brain creativity come into play for you? Because again, just to kind of frame out the question, I feel like I've been in this industry about a decade, and I felt like the pendulum has swung more and more toward, the other side, where there is an openness to there is an openness from organizations to let, non-JD types into this game. And I think the rate of that change, I think, is increasing. And, we're seeing a lot more of these kind of complementary teams built together. So where do you see, teams built with like a lot of these complementary personalities, not like these monoliths? Where do you see, where does that creativity come into play in your role right now?
So it would be, if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, or if you have kids in your life, right? Like all those different voices and personalities, right? I feel like often, if you were in my brain, it would be a whole movie within itself for that kind of duality of my brain. But it's interesting because on the analytical side, you have all of these different aspects that can at times create chaos, right? So you have all of the regulations, the rules, are we complying? Are we not complying? Depending on if it's something that includes data. And you have to think about logistically, how does all of that come together? And from a logical standpoint, does it make sense? And you have to be able to apply that. And in programs, especially compliance programs, it is very specific. It's very structured. And organization is key in that. You don't want it to be here and here and here and here. On the flip side of that, the creativity is, to me, an opportunity to really use innovation. And I'll give you an example. So if something is off in a process, right? In compliance, we'll get different policies, procedures, way of doing things. And, the subject matter expert will write it out and it'll cross my desk, is this, do we have any compliance concerns? It'll keep moving to legal, et cetera. And
Yep.
if something is off in a process and I'm looking at it, and by off, I mean, it's not appropriately written where you can understand it outside of being the doer that's doing it, that'll irk me. If it's just flat out not effective, not efficient, it'll really, you want to see my wheels turning, it'll really, really bother me. Even in my personal life, if I look at something and it doesn't make logical sense and it just seems ineffective and just, well, if you did it this way, you wouldn't even need to do that. And I don't understand the flow because it just does not make that, analytical, logical. There's a quicker way to get there.
Yeah, you have you have that kind of discernment.
Well, thank you. It'll irk me, and you can sometimes see it on my face, and my brain will just start churning. And that's where that creative side of me comes in also, because then I will want to innovate. I will want to make it better. And until I do, I'm like a dog with a bone. I will not stop because I have this need to both improve things. Again, that greater good coming in and that creativity to innovate and say, well, wait a minute, let's not just accept it. Well, we've always done it this way, or this is the way, it says to do it, but let's think about that and let's make it right for us and bring that creativity to make it meaningful in a way that it makes sense. So I think those things are very balanced and actually complementary at the end of the day, all jokes aside from them sounding like they're two polar opposites. And it brings it together in a way that also people are able to resonate with, right? So nothing drives me nuts if you put out compliance materials or even a notice of privacy practices and it's ugly, right? Why do important things need to be boring or dull? Can they be pretty also, or can they have some flair? Can they be marketable? Because that's a big shift also in our industry today of, how are we finding ways for it to resonate in a way that people are going to want in, right? How are we selling it?
That's the word. I mean, the word is selling it. In order to sell, you have to at least pierce that veil of attention, which is thicker than it's ever been, right? I mean, people's attention spans are so low. They're bombarded with stimuli and content constantly on their social feeds and the ads that they see and stuff like that. We really end up stacking the deck against us when something that is important, we kind of stick the stick in our own bike spokes by not, spending that extra minute to pretty it up a little bit, or just do something, to your point, to try to pierce that veil of attention. If people don't pay any, if they don't pay it any mind, it's never going to get into their mind,
Exactly.
What did you mean by organizational death by mindset, and how people sticking too strictly to their swim lanes can be kind of counterproductive and have these sort of negative externalities across our business?
Yeah, so that's a fun one. I'm going to use an analogy here. So I used to, earlier on in my compliance career, and I still remember some of the conversations, I would be talking to people that were in very similar but different swim lanes, right? Or capacities operationally or organizationally. I resonate or I relate to you being in compliance because of this, and your swim lane's here and my swim lane's here, and we can work together this way. Because I was envisioning it like the Summer Olympics, right? We're all following the same rules. We have these different lanes. I had the whole analogy built out in my brain of why it made sense. And kind of recently it hit me that I was like, wait a minute, I have gosh darn wrong summer event going on here. I need to just change it up. We need to think about this more like, what is it, the sculls or the rowing, right? We got the team and they're all going like this, because in actuality, it was also a shift of really leaning into this concept of organizational accountability in compliance and ethics. And what does that look like for your organization and what they are doing to step up to the plate? It becomes less about what the compliance officer is doing. What is the Department of Compliance doing? Where are all their checks and balances and running the program? And more so, how is the organization carrying that out? Where are we tapping into our operational leaders, not in their own swim lanes, but saying, hey, we need to do this, and bringing them to the table and understanding who's responsible, who's accountable, who are the doers. Why are we just always pointing the finger at compliance when this is really a team sport and everybody needs to be at the same pace, even, at their oars, if we were to stick with that analogy, right? And moving together. It's not about this person's time in this lane and this person in this lane. And so that shifted, Olympic events for me, if you will. But it was kind of that aha moment when I was like, I think I've been looking at this wrong.
Mm-hmm. That analogy, or those rowing teams, kind of to your point, it requires a tremendous amount of effort, of course, but also a tremendous amount of coordination. Everyone kind of knows what each other's doing, and I think that is better. So with the death by mindset thing, what do you think that is? Organizations are kind of dying by having this sort of, implicit in that sort of swim lane analogy is a natural siloing, which kind of disconnects the organs of the body. How do you kind of address that? Because you can't put out a pretty edict to get people to kind of change their mindset about it. It's really kind of a game of influence, or melting those maybe frameworks that are really governing how people are actually behaving. How do you kind of start attacking that? Is that sort of a top-down approach? Is it just sort of among your team? How do you kind of shift that focus away from that swim lane sort of siloed approach that most organizations, in my experience, end up kind of falling into, and moving more toward that high harmony, highly harmonious, coordinated effort that you see on the crew or whatever?
I think it takes really strong relationship building and strategy in how you're approaching others. Are you intentional? If there are other leaders or people involved in things before a new regulation rolls out, or something that's going to happen and it's going to go down, what steps is the compliance department or the compliance officer taking proactively to give people a heads up, or to build that relationship or that strategy before it happens? Because where I see people moving into the silos or those different swim lanes is they haven't put in the work. And I think, to answer your question, ultimately it comes down to relationships, and really thinking about, what does this person need to know? Where is it going to matter to them and their lens? And have you built out your compliance program in a way that they know how what they do on a daily basis impacts those different avenues?
Right.
I've found a lot of effectiveness in getting to know people, getting to know their pain points, understanding what things they're struggling with, because I truly do believe at the end of the day, I've had the pleasure to work with so many people that they don't always make the right choices, where sometimes organizations end up in a place of non-compliance, or they're about to. That ship already has sailed, right? We've been there and it's already down the tracks, and you're having that difficult conversation of okay, why are we here? Or why did we make these decisions? And you start talking to people, or why do you want to take this path? Because you don't want to be, the classic department of no, or stopping things. And often I've found people are out for the good. They really don't care often about that thing that's making, ouch, that's a red flag, or that's going to cause us a violation.
Totally.
They care about that end goal. So if you're building those relationships, if you're understanding their strategy, their pain points ahead of time, then they're going to be picking up the phone. They're going to be thinking about that. Compliance is going to be, and working in an ethical manner, going to be part of integrated into who they are and their decision making. Or they're just, if they're not sure, they're going to call you and say, hey, what about this? Or do I need to be concerned? Or maybe we move it this way operationally, and then, crisis or problem averted.
So, what you said is obviously true, at least to me. And yet compliance has this this sort of negative reputation that a lot of us are trying to turn the tide on and trying to, change the way that we show up in the organization. Why do you think what you just described is so difficult for compliance folks in general, or historically? Maybe let's just give kind of current folks the benefit of the doubt. Why was that approach so hard as to have caused the creation of this, stereotype or this caricature that so many of us are trying to shake off of us?
That's a deep question, and I'm not sure I have all the answers, but I think for a long time there was an approach, and I saw it early on, and I candidly hated it. But I think I fell into it a few times because I didn't know any better of, you have this kind of playbook or the 7 elements of the compliance program, and thou shalt do this, you need to have that, and here's the laws that apply. And then you have this other aspect where, well, we just need to comply and here's how to do it. And leadership for a while, I think, especially in healthcare, wanted to keep kind of compliance in a corner. You can't be friends with them in order to have, complete non-biased opinions or judgments or calls, like
independence, all that.
All that. You need to be over here. Right. And I've seen that happen as well. And I think people have started including the new, guidance that came out from the government for compliance programs. They're starting to say, wait a minute, is that right?
Yeah, right.
Does this really help make us better for the greater good and our decisions? And do we really need, and I'm sorry for this, lawyers, but do we need more lawyers or people saying this is the law, this is what you should do, and here it is? Or do we need people that are more strategic partners to say, how did we make the choices we made?
Yeah. Nobody does what they should do, right? Like, you should not eat Twinkies. I don't know. Do people still eat Twinkies? You should not speed, and yet everybody speeds. You should not smoke cigarettes. People smoke cigarettes. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's all these things that we all know what we should do. And then there's some kind of gray zone that people feel like, I can do a little bit in there. And I think, back to the point from before, it's really a game of persuasion. It's really a game of influence, doing it in a compelling way, having enough trust and at least enough insight about the person or the department or whatever that you're trying to drive toward that more compliant behavior to understand the realities of it. I think part of it, so let's go back to what you said on kind of, which was an answer to my question of, why is this so hard? I think some of it was sort of structural, and some of it was, maybe in our industry's infancy, it was just like, okay, well, if this is the law, then like we should follow it and everybody's just going to automatically follow it. As opposed to kind of flipping it on its head and understanding that like there's a lot of dynamics and a lot of constraints and a lot of pressures on all these different departments. And like you said, it's not like the company's full of nefarious actors, but for the compliance department, who is like, we're high integrity only. You know what I mean? I have found that most violations are due to kind of a system issue or a misunderstanding, or it's true even of like personal conflicts. Like 9 times out of 10, it seems to be some kind of misunderstanding at the base of it, because most people seem to be well-intending. They seem to want to do the right thing. They're not trying to make somebody else, especially in their own company. They're not trying to make somebody else's life more difficult, And so I love that approach. And I want to kind of pivot a little bit toward this like small win framework. How do you maintain that, perspective to look for those small wins and let those things stack in the face of presumably, broader kind of higher level changes or that you want to make, or like a vision of where the program can be? I'm kind of talking about like, we're always trying to climb toward this summit, especially type A people like you, trying to climb toward this next summit. That requires a vision and sort of a direction and a focus of effort toward that goal. How do you balance the achievement of that, with like the progress that you're making along the way that sometimes you can't really notice? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think part of it is you need somebody at the helm that understands, the whole concept of the forest and the trees, right? Yeah. Of all the pieces and the moving parts that have to happen before you get to it. And realistically, big goals, culture shifts, some of the things that I think compliance and ethics professionals are up against, they don't happen overnight. And no matter how great an organization is, I'm sure if you really kind of look under the hood or really get into those closets, there's things that need work.
100%.
Nobody's perfect. Nobody's program is. And understanding, I'm going to stick with the forest and trees from it, but understanding kind of those in a strategic way, small wins, as you called them, or parts that need to happen before you get there, and not underestimating their importance, I think is key. And I don't think this is a new concept. We see it a lot in nutrition. So nutrition is something that I absolutely love. I even at one point once long ago was like, I want to be a nutritionist. Like it's just so vitally important. So it's something that I studied, and I don't mean, in the academic sense, but just, the more books, the merrier. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it in the sense of even nutrition, right, of those, you mentioned Twinkies, right? All those small choices, all those, the calories you're putting out in your body, or the exercise patterns, all those things that to make you a healthy person or a healthy lifestyle, all those little things add up, right? In order to say, I want to get to this point in health, or I want to get to this amount of muscle mass, or whatever it may be. And in circling back to, the compliance field, I don't see it as any different, because in order to get to that big goal or that big pivotal point in the culture, you have to look at those different choices, those different motivators, and those different smaller goals or smaller subsets to be able to get to that final point. So I think it's vital in order to break it down in a way that makes sense. And you learn some things along the way too. Maybe you learn, that, this thing that we thought we needed to get there, that taught us something new. And we actually need to change that big thing because we learned this through these smaller ones, right? Which
is easier to make those connections when you're not living in that sort of swim lane, super siloed way. And, frankly, compliance really has this opportunity. It's a very unique department in an organization because it touches so much. The sales department doesn't touch every other department. It's not like every department touches every other department like the compliance department does. So there is an opportunity there if we can, try to build that muscle, that sort of bird's eye view muscle, to start to see some of those commonalities and see some more of those patterns and see, the humanity across these different departments, not to get too touchy-feely on it, but it's a bunch of human beings. And that kind of brings me to this next thing about, soft skills and storytelling. And, I think you and I both agreed in our pre-call that if in fact compliance is trying to drive behavior of people that we're not maybe coming in sort of direct contact with every day, then that really turns into a game of influence. And, human beings, we're trying to influence human beings, of course. Storytelling is such a superpower, or that's an arrow that you can put a bunch of wood behind and really drive some real impact and some real kind of changes in those behaviors. Why do you think, narrative is more effective than just issuing a new policy? And why do you think we as a sort of industry don't leverage that as much as we could?
So I'm going to take you back for a moment. And I love the concept of storytelling for so many reasons. And I promise I'll answer your question, but I want to sidestep for a moment. So way back when in the day, I knew somebody and they were such a phenomenal writer. I mean, just you read their stuff and it didn't matter what it was about. It just drew you in. This person just had that it factor, right? You know what I mean? You know, when you read it, when you're watching it on a television show, you're just like, I can't get enough. They had that. Yeah. And so I was talking with them because they were a close friend. And I said, I want more. I want to know, how do you get there? How do you do this? And they just shut me down right there. And They said, I am not a writer. And I was like, hmm? He said, I'm a storyteller. That's the difference. Yeah. I said, huh. And I don't think it fully resonated then. I think that planted the seed, right? And I wasn't even in my compliance phase journey part in life, but I always kind of remembered that and I hung on to that. And then so fast forwarding into the compliance world, through a lot of different situations and also writing, responding to government inquiries or presentations, or now even, leading my department, leading a team, when I'm speaking to operational leaders, right? It comes down to this concept of what story do we have to tell? And especially from an ethical and a compliance standpoint, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, it sidesteps, it still takes into account the legalities, the law, the regulations, but it puts that on pause for a moment. It really brings out the how and the why, especially for other leadership or for people in the organization. Because in my team, they quote me on it. And even when I am not there, they have called me and said, Janine, I literally used your phrase, like, what story is this going to tell? Because if that's not a story that you would want told in that way of why you made the choices that you made or how you got to where you got to, then I think as humans, right, we need to go back and we need to rethink that. Because I'll give you an example, in a presentation or when you're, wanting to explain a new regulation, or you're wanting to get operational leaders on the hook, or your board of directors, are you saying it in a way that's going to draw in their attention? Are you going to explain it in a way that you're knowing your audience, that they're going to be able to understand it, or that you're going to be able to bring them along? And are they even associating themselves with, the heroes or the antagonists of that story? Like, there's so many different elements. If you look at, and that's what sparked a column I wrote, what makes a good story? And you look at those different story elements, you can see the difference in whether you're giving a presentation or whether you're writing up, an executive summary of what parts of that are important to your delivery and to being able to create this meaningful experience for people.
Have you heard about the but therefore framework for storytelling?
No.
This is great. So if you're telling a story and you're saying, you find yourself saying, and then, that's probably a pretty boring story. But if in between those story beats, there is a but or a therefore, that's probably a much better story. It's probably like a 10 times better story.
I love that.
Yeah. So
I got to try that.
Yeah, try it. And as I've started to tune into it, I have seen that, like, when I can really tell a story using that but and therefore framework, you can feel if you're telling a boring story or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's so many times we end up, and what that forces you to do, I think, is it's easy to tell a story to say, like, this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened, but that kind of gives sort of equal value to each one of those beats. But each one of those beats in the story do not, each one of those things that you say in between the and thens, those are not as powerful or as impactful or whatever. If you use that but and therefore approach, you end up pulling out of that string of events that have happened in sort of a serial way, the ones that are of bigger magnitude, you know what I'm saying, that are meatier or that have more sort of depth to them.
I love that. That's good.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually, I got that from a video I saw from the South Park creators. And that's how they write every single episode, that but therefore framework. And it really works across everything, But something you said really resonated with me. Like, what story is this going to tell, or what story do we want to tell? Like, we have power over that. We have power over, and everything ends up being a story, right? Like, if you look at a presentation, someone's going to come away from that with some kind of a picture that if somebody asks them, well, what was that about? They're going to tell a story. Essentially, it might be a bad one. It might be, riddled with a bunch of and thens, but that's kind of how we think, our memories are stories in a lot of ways.
That's right.
I want to pivot into this thing. You brought up this Einstein test, and since our pre-call, it's been like ringing in my head over and over again. And it's kind of like the explain it to me like I'm 5 type of test, right? I think he had that quote that said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't know it well enough. Yep. How do we get better at that thing? I think sometimes it's hard for us who maybe it's hard for us to zoom out and have that 30,000 foot view. It's hard for us to sort of deconstruct what's most important and what, isn't important, right? Like what we can edit out. How do we get better at building that kind of muscle of, being able to boil down a concept to its like most, core, simple components that are easy for folks to digest?
So I have to give credit to my dad for this. Shout out to him, because he is one of the smartest people I know. He's the guy that worked from out at Kennedy Space Center on solid rocket boosters to solar power to the Z machine, which is like the biggest X-ray thing in the world with nuclear fusion. And,
Whoa.
like I'm talking about smart guy, but the most humble, explain it to me like I'm 5 years old type of guy. And he ingrained this concept. And he was the first one that ever told me that quote, actually, when I was a kid, because I have a natural tendency to overcomplicate things. Big surprise in my lovely personality. And so it's very humbling, because I think, to answer your question, the first part of that is you have to be honest with yourself. And often, and I think that's really hard to do, people that I find are overcomplicating or over talking about something, or it just seems really, you were like in the washing machine with them. Like, what? Okay, so what is it that you wanted to, and right? It's because they don't know it. So I think we all have to be very honest with ourselves. And if you cannot explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. And my father ingrained that to me when I was a kid. I'd try to explain something and he'd say, okay, go back and learn it some more and come back when you can explain it simply to me. And that sounds a little bit harsh, but I really appreciated that, because it was true. Because once I truly grasped it, or it really resonated, or it had meaning to me, or I knew it, I memorized it, suddenly it becomes much shorter, becomes much more simple. So that's number one. Be honest, really assess, do I truly know this, or do I need to go back? Do I need to study it more? Do I need to understand it more? And then second, you have to keep other people in mind and their lens. You can't always, even if you do truly grasp it, explain it in a way that it resonates with you. If you're talking to a physician, we'll pick on them for a minute, right? In healthcare, do you really expect to explain something and why it's important to them from a compliance lens, or you think you're going to pivot that and explain it in a way that's potentially going to talk about clinical care, and then you can move forward and say what you need to say? So keep other people's lens in mind. And, at the end of the day, my final test, I'm a mom, I have a 7-year-old and he is one smart cookie. Ask a kid. They'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
If they can't get it, and if you can't explain it to a 7-year-old, you need to go back and think about that. And I've used him as a test a few times for compliance stuff. And it's amazing the feedback I get. I can, even though he's a child, I can go, oh, that's the pain point right there. Let me go back and rework that. And of course I refilter it into a more professional or, what I'm doing lens. But again, that sense of honesty.
Yeah, I like that approach. You have to learn it a little bit more. And then the second thing do you really have a true depth of knowledge, and are you able to sort of scale up or down in the level of detail you share based on like the perceived context that the other person might have, whether it's age or it's professional focus or whatever. The second thing you said really resonated with me, because that's really just a framing exercise. And in order to, a picture can have 1,000 different frames on it. You know what I mean? If I'm trying to paint a picture for you, then I need to frame that thing appropriately. And we have that ability and right to frame whatever topic we're talking about, whatever initiative we have, in a way that is going to resonate most with the audience we're talking to. And so what I found is that in compliance, there's so many things to attach to. You know what I'm saying? You can attach to, if somebody really cares about quality, then I can attach to that. If somebody cares about the greater good, I can attach to that. If somebody cares about outperformance, well, I can attach to that. Like, we don't lack things. Like we don't lack frames. We lack like the agency of like changing the frame, in my experience. How do we get people more comfortable with changing those frames? I mean, because like the number of policies that I've like helped folks with, where I've seen like, well, here's a one size fits all policy for everybody, please follow it. And it's like super long, as opposed to having a little bit of thoughtfulness, like you alluded to earlier, to say like, this is, if you're in sales, this is what you need to know. If you're in ops, this is what you need to know. You understand what I'm saying? Like being able to frame this thing out in the context of what resonates with them or what they care about definitely stacks the deck in your favor and gives you a much higher likelihood that they're going to end up choosing to follow or choosing to like behave in the new way that you're trying to reinforce,
Absolutely.
Okay. So you wrote this article and your son helped you with it. And it was, or I guess it was like inspired by your son. Tell me that story, because I think that's a nice tie into the last thing you just mentioned here.
Oh my goodness. So the backstory to that is I had I write a column for HCCA, or Compliance Today, and it's Compliance Essentials. It's the every other month column, and it's 400 words or less. So talk about explaining something really short and simply, totally, right? You have to really, really cut it down. And I had done a couple that I didn't love. And reason for that is my husband had open heart surgery this summer. And so I had candidly a little bit of writer's block, right? I was just getting back to work. I was trying to get my head back in the game, and I needed to write another column, and I had some, pre-ideas written down, and none of them were really resonating with me at the time. And I wanted to write something meaningful. I knew that much, because the last two just didn't quite, they were decent, but when you have that sense that you write something and you really, really just personally love it, like I wanted that kind of a feel after just trying to recenter after everything that had happened this summer. And so I was sitting with my son, and he was eating his breakfast. I'm with my coffee, and I have my little, very old school notebook, like you're going to go field watching birds, with my little,
yeah.
And he's like, Mom, what are you doing? And I said, well, because, just I'm trying to figure out what I want to write about, for my column. And he goes, well, what's the column about again? And I'm just, head and palm going like, okay, this is going to be great. And another sip of coffee. And I said, compliance, what I do for a living. And he goes, oh, okay. Well, that's simple. Just be a good person and help other people. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you do kind of get what I do. And I'm like, all right, I like that. And I was like, all right. So, eating his breakfast. And I was like, all right, so tell me a little bit more about this. I said, well, to be a good person, I said, well, what are some things that you think being a good person is? Like tell me more about that. And so takes another bite of his food, and he's like, well, accountability, Mom. And I'm like, all right, well, what's accountability to you? And he's like, well, like if you drop your books on the floor in class, you need to pick them up so other people don't trip all over them. And I was like, legit.
Keep going.
Okay, keep going. And I'm like, I can totally there's so many things about accountability, totally. Right? Because then, and so I was like, all right, what else? And he's like, well, respect. I said, okay, well, what about respect? And he gave me an example for respect. And then I was like, all right, well, anything else? And he said, well, caution. And I said, caution? And he said, well, yeah, you don't want to just jump off the tall slide on the playground or jump off the rock wall. You want to look, or you want to check to make sure things are safe first. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was
here,
like,
you write it here.
Wow, that's really good, because I think in my head's going too, using caution and choices and all this. Totally. And I was like, wow, all right. And I was taken back because, my kid literally is 7, and it was an over breakfast and coffee conversation. And it was just so meaningful, because then I sat down and I was thinking about those concepts in compliance and ethics and being a good person. And it was very grounding. And it was also just very humbling to say, like, what is my elevator pitch when I tell people I am, a compliance officer has been the most challenging thing probably in all of my career. Because how do you explain compliance to people?
It means you don't know it if you can't boil it down.
Right? It literally makes you feel that way sometimes, right?
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
How do I explain to people, like, that have no clue, that aren't in this field, what I do? And the fact that my kid understood enough from either hearing conversations or just things that we talked about, was able to link those concepts together and also to apply them in his everyday life was very meaningful to me, because it was like, wow, you were able to grasp, and going back to that framing concept, you were able to grasp this and understand it in a way that was meaningful in your, second grade, 7-year-old world, which was just huge. And it also was inspiring because, no matter how old we are, it was like, yeah, don't, have respect. Don't push people off the playground. Totally. In compliance, we can't go pushing people around and bulldozing to move a program forward. And just all those other little things. So
yeah, that's such a cool like deconstruction of this whole thing that is so complex and is so all over the place, and the shape of it is so different in one industry or another, or one company or another. That had to be like a super memorable moment. Like, you'll probably never forget that.
Oh, for sure. And, my only regret is I couldn't, put him as a co-writer for his, one day college essay of like,
yeah, exactly.
when you're 7.
That's funny. All right. Well, we're getting right to the end here. I always like to ask this question. Well, before I ask this question, what advice would you give to introverts? There's a lot of introverts in the space, and, I think, yeah, so I have advice for introverts, but what's your advice for introverts?
I think that we have a unique lens to be able to be very introspective. And I think a lot of people are mistaken by introverts, because even my husband sometimes laughs. He's like, you are not an introvert. You go and you do public speaking and, this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, it's where we, draw our energy from. And introverts have this aspect of self-reflection and being okay with just being alone. And so my advice for introverts would be is to lean into that and take those moments to reflect, to be able to think, so that when we are public facing in the field, we can use that to our advantage and really take all of that energy and self-reflection to then be able to put it forth out there, to whomever we're speaking with, we're interacting with, because I feel that is an advantage if, people are able to get out of their shell, to really take those introspective and just self times to use it for the greater good.
Yeah. We live in kind of like an extroverted society, where that extroversion is kind of like broadly like valued, but I think introversion is a feature. It's not a bug. And I love that advice that you just had. All right. Last question, I promise. If you can go back in time and find a young Janine, what advice would you want to give her? What piece of advice did you wish that you would have gotten earlier?
Oh man. I think a couple of things. One of them would be, chill out, little human. And it's okay to be an enigma. So, A-type perfectionist, likes to have everything right there. And so I think that at the end of the day, that causes me to be a very high performer, and go, and always hitting the marks. But I think that also, I've seen that result in burnout a lot in life. So I would say, it's okay to find out where those small wins are, and those points where it's like, okay, rest. You don't have to be on all the time, and to really just find a sense of, center and calm. And then the enigma part, I really spent a lot of time in my life going back and forth, like I said earlier, between, that analytical side and that creative side, and that need to just be very kind of in my head and thinking through, and that introspective understanding the world around me. And then the other side of just intellectual and logical thinking, and, that concept of being emotional and being sensitive equals drama, or when it's not necessarily that. So I think I would go back and say, like, lean into those internal conflicts. And I promise you one day they're actually going to come out together to create a more just centered and happy place in life. Because I think we all battle with our own kind of idiosyncrasies, or things that at times when we are young, we're like, why is that so conflicting? And the world tells me I should be this way or this way, and I don't feel like I should be either way. I'm somewhere kind of in the middle. And especially in today's society, I think there's such a call to be like, you have to be this way or this way, and pick one, right? And I think going back, I would just offer my small little self that encouragement. Like, maybe you don't have to pick one. Maybe who you are is somewhere balanced in the center, and these things that seem like polar opposites really can come together for something really special.
Love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Janine. This is a lot of fun. We will see you next time on the Ethics Experts.